Nearly 2 million American workers report each year they have been the victim of workplace violence. That's according to the U.S. Bureau of Statistics and the National Crime Victimization Survey. Safety at work is on many people's minds once again after last week's shooting at a community college in Oregon. Across the country, workplace shootings are still the leading cause of death for women in the workplace, and statistics show that domestic violence-related deaths continue to pose a serious threat to public safety here in New Mexico. Our correspondent Stan Wilson sat down recently with two local experts to talk about what these numbers mean for New Mexico.
I'm joined by Lisa Weisenfeld, Policy Coordinator for the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She also served as an Assistant District Attorney in the state of New Mexico, prosecuting domestic violence cases. And Richard Price, a retired 21-year veteran of the FBI, who now serves as a senior analyst for Soteria Group, a security firm based in Albuquerque. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Stan.
Rich, let me start off with you. According to the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, 70% of U.S. workplaces still have no formal policy or program to address workplace violence. How concerned are you about it?
I'm very concerned, just with the violence in our country today, and in domestic violence specifically. It's on the rise, and it's a very big concern of ours.
Specifically, what are you concerned about?
Well, number one, a company having a plan. Do you have a plan to deal with domestic violence, such as somebody reporting to you anonymously if there's a problem within your workplace?
How likely is it that a business in New Mexico, for instance, might experience the potential for violence in the workplace?
The potential is very high.
What can be done about it?
Number one, educate your teams as far as what to look for, signs and signals of domestic violence. And number two, have some type of system in place that can be reported anonymously if that's what's required, so that information is passed on to the employer for the safety of your team.
Are you referring to violence from coworkers or other people?
It can be either. It can be from coworkers or it can be from a significant other.
Lisa, according to the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, another disturbing trend is that murder is still the leading cause of death for women in the workplace. What does that mean to you?
Well, Stan, unfortunately, domestic violence, as you both just described, is a very serious problem in the state of New Mexico and does not seem to be decreasing. We are not unique in the United States, but we are unique in the numbers. In fact, in terms of homicides, a recent study just came out a week or so ago, and we rank third in the nation for the number of homicides of women by men in this state, second only to South Carolina and Alaska.
What are you doing about it from the standpoint of a coalition that represents statewide domestic violence cases?
So we don't actually represent domestic violence cases, but we are a coalition of 30 member programs statewide who provide services. And those services address both offenders who have been accused and convicted of domestic violence crimes, as well as providing services to victims of those crimes. What we do as a coalition is try to identify gaps in systems and policies that adversely affect survivors and those programs, and then come up with, develop and implement advocacy approaches and initiatives, including legislation, where warranted, to address those.
Well, we think about domestic violence in the home for the most part. But in terms of the workplace itself, what can be done to alleviate the potential from your perspective?
I guess, again, wordsmithing, alleviate the potential. I guess we're both in the business of sort of minimizing risks because of the nature of what we're dealing with. And you're right, you're absolutely right. The domestic violence used to be thought of as a private matter in the home. And as we know all too well now, domestic violence and the threats that come from that follow victims wherever they go. So whether that be schools, or whether that be the grocery store, or whether that be their place of employment, that is a real threat.
Richard, what is the most important first step that businesses can take in preparing for the potential threat?
I would say number one, have a plan. You need to have a plan of action as far as a reporting mechanism for employees and or the actual victim.
What does it entail when you refer to a plan?
Have a set of rules or a contact system where certain individuals can be contacted and specific information can be identified, and specifically threat information towards an employee or a spouse or a significant other.
Well, given your experience in the FBI handling some of the biggest profile cases in the country, from 9/11 to the Columbine shootings in Colorado, what are the warning signs to look for in identifying someone who may pose a serious threat?
Well, being with the FBI for 21 years and doing what I'm doing today with Soteria Group, we've dissected cases over the last 30 years. Mental illness, unaddressed and addressed mental illness is a big factor. A lot of people know, such as the Virginia Tech case, perpetrators of crimes, many times the information was known, but it wasn't passed along, or the right people not knowing. And that's a critical link as far as connecting the dots that the correct people know.
Lisa, what would you cite as some of the flaws, based on your experience, both as a prosecutor and an advocate, in terms of identifying a big factor in the workplace where something can be done to prevent the potential for a violent event?
I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question.
Well, give us an example. You say that domestic violence itself is a taboo subject. People are afraid to talk about it. Does the employer have a responsibility to do something?
You know, I truly feel that employers have a unique ability to do something about this. Not only do they have a professional duty to the people in their employ, but also they tend to be pretty amazing, outstanding members of communities. And as such, I think that employers have a great role, and I would echo what Richard said about having a plan, but I would be really specific about that plan that I would advocate for, that it is comprehensive, right?
Give us an example, because when you mentioned that you had a 10-point plan that you would want to move into some kind of policy level. What exactly does that entail?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, there are model workplace policies that I'm happy to, if people contact the Coalition website, I'm happy to refer people to, but they include things like education, training for supervisors as well as employees, providing services for people who may be employees who are affected by domestic violence, and those who may have been charged with domestic violence. We really do feel that employers play an important role there as well.
What, does Soteria Group do in this kind of workplace in terms of safety, planning, infrastructure?
What we do is, for the instance, let's say the circumstance of schools, we sit down with the administration to understand the climate of that school. We do what we call a snapshot overview, basically a site survey. We take a look at the facility, the physical facility, and then we talk to the people within those facilities. In schools, administrators, teachers, faculty, and students. In the workplace, we talk to business owners and executive management to understand what the issues are. And that way we can start addressing those issues and then try to identify if certain circumstances arise, how do they deal with those circumstances, and having a plan to address.
If you can briefly address another survey that was cited by the National Safe Workplace Institute, 94% of corporate security and safety directors rank domestic violence as a high security concern. What will it take for businesses and other institutions to come up with a plan in place to prevent the potential for violence? Rich, why don't you finish?
I would agree with Lisa's saying. Education and training is critical. It needs to be addressed. We need to not bury our heads in the sand. It's a prevalent issue in society today. We need to address it head on. with our business people. Because again, people don't want to address, it's a delicate topic.
What's the answer?
Well, here's one point that I just want to make that I think is really important. Employers play an incredibly important role, but it's how they respond to the threat, right? So what I would recommend is not a knee-jerk, there's the problem. The problem is domestic violence. She's the employee, so she's the problem. Then if I just get rid of her, there goes the problem. In fact, that is not true, because the problem doesn't go away, and you got legal implications possibly in doing that, so you want to get some sort of legal counsel before you do that, if you were anticipating doing that. But also, what about everybody else in that work environment, right? I think most employers want a safe and happy workplace where productivity is good, and you can't do that while ignoring the problem. So I think that we have some laws in place in New Mexico that are not tremendous, but we have some, and I just wanted to mention them. We have a Promoting Financial Independence for Domestic Violence Survivors law that guarantees that employers need to give, are required to give survivors up to 14 days within a calendar year of leave time, whether that be paid or unpaid, to be able to go to appointments, to be able to meet with law enforcement, go to courts, and they cannot be retaliated against for doing that. It shouldn't affect the rest of their compensation. And if they do end up losing their job, which many survivors do, which is, I would say, a very big policy concern of mine, then they do qualify for unemployment, potentially. So ordinarily with unemployment, if you're fired, you don't get to apply. But if you're a domestic violence survivor who leaves their job because of domestic violence, you can indeed apply for unemployment.
It's an important issue, a critical one. I thank you both for your time and appreciate you being here.